it's clear that EdTech is actually about evolution. It's not a revolution. And so what we're seeing right now for the future, and from all the research that our analysts are doing, is that there's much more focus on the ed part of EdTech. That is, that there's less emphasis on the software and the tools, and a ton of more kind of focus and emphasis placed on the students and the teachers. And it's important to reconcile the fact that we're not just looking at this from a schooling perspective, but also from a learning and development perspective. And I'll get into some of this later, but there are 4 areas that I'd like to focus on. So the first is that actually, we're seeing like a strong focus on pathways to employment, given the fact that the boundaries between like work and what we call work and what we call education are rapidly dissolving. So we're seeing a greater emphasis on internships. We're seeing a greater emphasis. I think one of the previous speaker also kind of alluded to this. Career advice is also becoming a pretty important part of education, and then making sure that the student is job ready and also work ready. And there's actually a difference between jobs and work, obviously. But the cool thing about all this is that the companies that are working on the edges of talent and learning are a huge trend right now. So everything from, like I said, placements, internships, they're being reinvented. And on the other side, we're seeing technologies mapping skills and jobs with courses and learners. Think of how Tinder changed the game for dating, Bumble changed the game for dating, and then moved into networking. Well, actually, we're already seeing startups and companies focus on helping match students with the courses that they might be interested in, helping students get matched with the teachers that they might actually be interested in. Obviously not in an educational context. I have to emphasize. And I think we're going to see considerable activity over the next few years, not just for education companies and organizations in the training world, but also technology companies, because it's all about the data. For over the last few years, companies like Google and Apple have focused very much on getting their hardware into the classroom, into the kind of L&D element. But what we haven't seen them really start thinking about is how they can monitor and how they can make use of that data and how they can really work that data. So again, that's the first area to focus on. That's the pathways to employment. And then the second area is actually student recruitment. So the recruiting of students by universities, by higher education institutions, and actually the recruitment of students by education providers, including things like Coursera and Udemy and some of the other companies that we've talked about over the last few hours. Like the new technologies that are emerging to help students find the kind of study destinations that are important are really interesting, and we're also seeing new platforms emerge with the aim of actually disrupting how students pay for education. We're now seeing it's still early days, but we're seeing startups that are focused more on the computer science end of things actually not even charge students, but charge the companies that these students will then be placed. It's almost like you take a class with us, take a course with us, we'll then offer you access to companies that want to hire you because we've trained you in the right way using all the latest algorithms and technologies, and then on top of that say, well, actually we won't even charge you for that learning experience. We're going to charge the company. So first area of focus was pathways to employment. Second area was actually student recruitment. The third area is, well, probably the most hyped bit of technology that's on everyone's kind of lips, and is only just starting to be developed further. It's artificial intelligence and machine learning. Now, I am a huge AI cynic and a skeptic. I often tell startups that we invest in not to pitch AI because I'm a firm believer that AI is just going to be a part of every startup will have AI. It's not a differentiator anymore. It's a need to have. But the question is actually, how will it affect education going forward? And we're not talking about just the business of education, but actually the actual learning and teaching environments. We've had over the last few years, we've probably placed undue importance on the personalization of teaching, but we may have actually been focusing on individualization instead of actual personalization. And then the fourth thing is probably, well, the second most hyped bit of the tech world, and that's blockchain. I don't actually believe it's going to have a massive impact on education over in the short term. It has the potential to kind of influence how learners own and manage their credentials and the storage of information, but from where I'm looking at it's not going to be as big as it's hyped out to be. So the challenges, and I'd love to start talking about a little bit of the challenges we have forward. So firstly, I think standardized testing is probably the bane of everyone's existence, right? Like, how do we assess people? How do we assess students, people, learners beyond using standardized tests? And so this is one of the areas where actually policymakers and politicians could probably have much more of an oversized impact than any startup, because obviously this is where governments regulate the area. So the assessment side of things, that's going to be a big challenge for us, and we're already advising startups that we are thinking of investing in or even already have invested in to sort of be aware of that area. And then the second bit is thinking about how curriculums have been developed over the years. So I actually have a mathematical background. I went to university for applied math, and we spent a considerable amount of time trying to figure out how to compute things as if computers didn't exist. But what if we could, and this is a radical sort of strategy, but what if you could change curricula so that they assumed computers existed, and so that students would be able to focus instead on solving real-world, higher-level problems, rather than having to kind of reinvent the wheel. So that's another challenge that I think is something that we're trying to kind of get our heads around. And then the third challenge, I think, is communication. Funny enough, actually, I don't know if you're aware, but there's actually an Edtech sort of app that's more popular than Gmail, Instagram, and Facebook and YouTube, but only during the back-to-school sessions. And it's actually an app called Remind, and it's actually a school communication tool. And so it effectively functions as a messenger for students, parents, and educators. But the fact that this is already an incredibly popular tool shows that there is a space here. So for a future that's going to be shaped by AI and 3D printing and all these other technologies, society obviously is trying to prepare the students of today and hopefully tomorrow's workforce, unless the robots take over. But society's trying to prepare the current students with things like more STEM education and more computer science education. But from the perspective of investors, and I sort of take a kind of impact investing view quite often, more often than not. One of the challenges one of the areas that we're not seeing a lot of innovation on is the ability to teach students or the ability to kind of inculcate in students philosophy and ethics and morality. I mean, I'm less concerned about the next generation's ability to be able to use a 3D printer, and I'm more concerned about how they're going to react to fake news and how we're going to be able to develop them as individuals so that they can continue solving the challenges of tomorrow. Again, and lastly, I also want to talk a little bit about AR. So AR, was hyped out to be a big disruptor in the context of learning and development, and then also in EdTech. And it's just not quite the disruptor that it's being made out to be in the higher education sector, especially like AR applications. So, augmented reality, where you're able to kind of use a lens to augment whatever you're seeing with additional layers of data. We all thought that it was going to shake up the college system to its foundations. But actually, it's now become a kind of what you would call a quaint teaching aid for vocational training. So, there's still, obviously, there's a lot of hype around a lot of these technologies, and that will always continue. But we're also at that point where we're able to look back and see how some of these trends have played out or haven't played out over the years. Because now we've been making trends about Edtech, and by we I mean the whole world. Obviously, we've all been making trends. We've all been talking about some of these trends for years now. We're able to look and analyze and see, what makes a trend, and how do you determine whether something goes from a trend to a fad, or something that goes from a trend to a universal thing. So one thing that we do know that's coming over the course of the next couple of years is 5G technology. And so as I think I can hear a collective eye roll, and some of you say, well, what's 5G going to have to do with this? Well, the cool thing is that if your existing Wi-Fi network, like if you were in, say, a fancy hotel in Turin right now, if your campus Wi-Fi network is actually starting to groan under the strain of hundreds of connected phones, tablets, laptops, and now thanks to the IoT, watches and toothbrushes, we're actually going to it's actually going to change the way we're able to connect and the way we're able to distribute and deliver education. So I think it's got two aims that are kind of relevant to technology and education. One is going to be way more robust to connect large numbers of devices and work equally well inside and outside of buildings. But it's just going to be fast. So it's going to be about 40 times faster than what we're able to have today. So that really changes the game, and we're now seeing large corporations like Vodafone, for example, has set up a 5G kind of Edtech challenge. I think it's to solve the way they describe it is to solve the challenges, including lack of student engagement and lack of teacher STEM expertise, and the need for a more immersive kind of personalized support for students with special needs. All that is we're kind of heralding 5G technology for as a savior for that, and I think that holds a lot of promise. It holds a lot of there should hopefully be a lot of truth in that as well. The other challenge that I'm seeing is that, or the other big trend is that the shift in technology usage is like quite apparent when it comes to the new kind of the new generational cohort. So this is the first year. I think 2019 will be the first year where the post-millennial generation, I think we'll call them Gen Zs now, is when they're going to be starting university. And so instead of holding kind of in-person office hours, we're seeing educators being able to have conversations using existing kind of messaging tools. So I talked just now about Remind, but actually we're now seeing professors hold lectures and post lectures in classes where actually most of the communication is done via a group WhatsApp channel, or even Signal or Telegram. And group projects are being able to take advantage of all the online collaboration tools. And you don't even need new online collaboration tools. Google Docs works just as fine. Slack or any of those tools. And so education technology can actually be really that simple. Now, one thing in closing, the one thing I do want to focus on is the fact that we are not paying enough attention on being inclusive. So one of the challenges we're seeing right now is that students with disabilities, or people with disabilities, and they don't even have to be students, I think the majority of people with disabilities don't get university degrees. And, we talk as much about personalized education and study skill training and using kind of adapted curriculums, but I think organizations are trying to find ways of being helpful to bridge that gap from everything from like flipped classrooms to blended learning, and also ultimately online courses. So, I'm still very optimistic, but I think we've still got a long way to go. Again, I have to stress, like I'm still very optimistic, but it's still going to be a while before the dust settles and we kind of figure out who the winners are in this market, or in these markets. What is absolutely crucial is that we've got to continue investing in infrastructure. So not just F5G, but also making sure that there are people who are willing to consider the way we deliver education. I think that's probably the most important thing, and that's a mindset shift. There's no amount of no massive schooling or even education is going to change that. I think it's just one of the things that comes with the generational shift that we're seeing. So I hope that was a useful kind of summary of what we're looking at and what we're seeing. So I would say again, it's all the way down to being able to collect more data about the preferences of the students, but also being able to collect data on the we're kind of at a very early stage here, sir. So what we're doing right now, what's happening right now, the trend right now in the early 2019 is that we're collecting data about students. We're pretty good at now understanding how students want to learn and what they want to learn and why they want to learn that. And then we're also pretty good at collecting data about how educational institutions, and again, I'm including everything from universities to high schools to online sort of providers. We're getting really good or they are getting really good at being able to track how well the students are educating or are being educated, how well they're retaining that information, but also how they're performing post study, right? So universities are now being judged based on how many of their students are able to maintain jobs or get jobs, after they complete a program. It's the same with the online providers. But what we haven't seen yet, and I think this is something that's going to come in the next couple of years, and that bit is that we haven't quite been able to map out in real time and have additional kind of, we haven't really been able to change the way education is actually delivered in real time. So what happens right now, it's still very linear. A person has to sign up, take a course, go through a few modules. And what we haven't seen is the kind of shifting around of modules to go, halfway through a module, if there is a sudden realization that the person may not have complete grasp of the language, well, that's when you could insert a language module within a module. So what we haven't seen is the true personalization, where what we've seen is kind of just the tip of the iceberg, and that's one of the things that makes me really excited. So I hope that answers your question. But I'll give you one thing to think about, and that's basically the obviously tackling the problem where you go next. But what if we made it so easy to switch jobs as it was to switch energy providers today? What if and there's a lot of people thinking about, a lot of Silicon Valley people, but also generally thinking about, if the big vision is to help people bring their best self to their work, and then also find their actual best self, what if you could hire and fire people based on, the personality traits that meant that they could do whatever job was at hand, based on their ability to pick up new skills as they go along. So we've talked a lot about I think the previous speaker talks a little bit about how there's a trend for people to learn Java, for example. But actually, what we're seeing, and especially on the hiring side for early stage high growth startups, is that we're able to teach people Java on the job. What we need to know is that do they have the soft skills involved around problem solving? Can they actually get along with their coworkers? Are they trustworthy people who won't fiddle their expenses?